Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby Burfoot, welcoming you to the latest episode of the podcast, Running, State of the Sport.
And this is George Hirsch, your co-host at Running, State of the Sport. In every episode, we talk to the smartest, most informed, most influential, and sometimes fastest runners on the planet.
This week, we have a great conversation with Dave McGillivray, who has run 51 straight Boston Marathons, the last 36 while he served as race course director. That meant that he didn't get to start running in Hopkinton until late afternoon, and he finished in downtown Boston after sunset. But with Dave, that's just a brief intro to his incredible lifetime endurance accomplishments.
I'll say, Dave's also finished 9 Ironman Triathlon races, run across the entire United States, and completed 7 marathons in 7 days, get this, on 7 different continents. I'm getting just tired, Amby, thinking of all the stuff that he's done. But most amazing to me, Dave's also done a 24-hour pool swim covering 27 miles in total. And on his birthday, every August, he runs, bikes, and swims his age in miles. He'll be turning 70 this year. So that tells you what he's ready to tackle this summer. He's done most of his endurance challenges to raise funds for nonprofits like the Jimmy Fund. And this year in the Boston Marathon, he's running for his own Dave McGillivray Finish Strong Foundation that inspires New England youth to increase their physical activity, build commitment, and just generally fulfill their lives. But before we get on to Dave, Amby, let's chat a little bit about the biggest running news and what's caught your attention.
Well, I think one big event was a special 10,000-meter race in Southern California. This race was set up to give some of the country's and world's best runners a chance to meet the World Championship and Olympic qualifying times for the 10,000, which are really stiff now. And there were a lot of sensational performances. At the top of that list, Grant Fisher won the race in 26:52:04, which is an Olympic qualifier, and steps behind him was the collegian Nico Young at 26:52:72. That also gives him an Olympic qualifier. As with the Olympic marathon trials, these guys still have to go to our track trials in Eugene this summer and clinch one of the top places. But at least they've got those all-important qualifying times now. In the women's race, Alicia Monson tried to run even faster than her American record that she set there last year. She ran a 30:03 last year. This year, she asked the pacing lights to get set at 29:37, which is an almost incredible time. She couldn't do it. She had a bad day and ended up dropping out, which happens to lots of people when they chase barriers like that. But Wayne Kaladi did make the standard. She ran 30:33, so that puts her in good shape for the Olympic trials and perhaps the Olympics next summer in Paris. George, what have you been paying attention to?
Well, I've been paying attention, Amby, to the Barkley Marathons, and to our listeners who don't know much about that event. It's considered to be the toughest, most brutal race of all. Ultramarathon runners look at it that way, and it's a race held in a small town, Wartburg, Tennessee. It's out in the outback, and there's no real trails on this, and it's a 5-loop course, and very few runners even ever finish it. So up until this year, there have been 17 finishers in the race, and that's over a 38-year race history. So it means most years there's never been a finisher at the Barkley. This year was historic because they had more finishers than they've ever had, and that was 5. But for the first time ever, there was a female finisher, Jasmin Paris, a British runner, and it just went viral. The news of her performance, it really entered the mainstream media, which is extraordinary for this event, which has just always been, kind of among insiders, a little bit of a cult event, if you will. And you have to run this 5-loop course, which is about, I think it's 130 miles in total. And get this, it has a elevation gain of 63,000 feet. So a lot of it is just straight uphill, not even on trails. You're just scrambling over rocks. And you have to do this in under 60 hours, which is close to impossible even for the best ultramarathon runners. And Jasmin, she made it exciting for the people who were following this race. And this year, a lot of people were because of her. She got to the finish line in 59 hours, 58 minutes, and 21 seconds. In other words, after 60 hours of running, she made the cutoff by 99 seconds. And the picture of her collapsing over the finish line is one that just, millions of people have looked at it, and it's just gotten a huge amount of attention.
Well, it was amazing to me to see that media attention, because we're not talking about Ultra Running Magazine and even Runner's World and mainstream running publications like that. We're talking BBC and New York Times, and everywhere picked up on this story. I think it was partially because she was the first woman to make it, Jasmin Paris, with her 59:58, and also because ultra running, for some reason, has seized the public's imagination. I don't know why. I watched a long documentary on the race last night, and this movie looked to me much more like a mountain scramble than it was an endurance running contest. I mean, they're running over 30 minutes per mile. That's not running. That's walking and hiking and scrambling and bouldering and all sorts of crazy stuff. Amazing endurance, mental toughness, unlike any of us on this planet have. But Jasmin Paris and a few others seem to. George, why is it that ultra running and even beyond ultra running, like Camille Herron's recent 6-day race, and in New York, as you know, every summer they have a 3,100-mile race. Why is this such a media big deal now?
Well, I think partly, Amby, this is an incredible moment for women's sports across the board. I mean, here we are in March Madness, and there's no question that the best-known athlete in March Madness is a woman basketball player. That's never been the case before. There's no man in the tournament that comes close to the voltage and the high power of Caitlin Clark. We're seeing it in sport after sport, and I think it's partly that. I think that the attention that Jasmin Paris got prior to this year, no woman had even started the 4th loop of this course, more or less the 5th loop, and more or less finishing the thing. And in the fashion that she did it, I mean, just the way she literally, people holding their breath as she staggered across the finish line after, virtually 60 hours of just amazing. And she was, like all of them, she was just beaten up and she was sick and cut up. And I mean, it is so beyond, I think, what people can imagine. I think that got all our attention.
You know what I learned last night from watching the documentary, George? If you finish 3 laps, that's called the fun run.
I've seen that.
That's the fun run. And by the way, one other event just came to my mind while you were talking, the recent Academy Award nominated movie about Diana Nyad and all of her endurance swimming events.
Look at that.
You're right.
Really, Diana Nyad, in a way, because of the movie. I mean, Annette Bening and an Academy Award doesn't hurt. She's getting more attention now as a 60-something-year-old than she did back when she was, swimming around Manhattan Island. So, as a young athlete.
And as you and I know, there's been this notion for a long time in distance running that women may have more endurance than men, that certain physiological processes may actually make them better at fat burning or something over the ultra distances. That hasn't been proven yet, but we're certainly seeing lots of examples out there, and people are very, very excited about it. And I think that's been among the biggest recent running news as we've seen it here at Running State of the Sport. This podcast, Running State of the Sport, is brought to you by MarathonHandbook.com and RunLongRunHealthy.com. Marathon Handbook is the world's leading marathon website with a special focus on trustworthy running information and free runner-tested training plans for all ability levels.
Run Long, Run Healthy is Amby's weekly newsletter with the newest, most scientific, and most useful training advice for runners.
Now let's turn to Dave McGillivray, our guest this week on the podcast, Running State of the Sport. Dave has run the last 51 Boston Marathons in a row, quite a streak, and the last 36 of them while serving as the marathon's race course director. That means he couldn't even begin his trek from Hopkinton until late afternoon or evening after everyone else had finished. That meant also, of course, that he finished in the dark. In addition to his many Bostons, Dave has completed 9 Ironman Triathlons and many other ultra events like running from coast to coast. Dave did most of these as charity fundraisers for well-known New England nonprofits. Dave, you're a busy guy. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, Amby, George, it's a pleasure to join you both, and we've known each other for a long time, and I look up to both of you, and it's an honor to be on your show.
So, Dave, let's get started with some basic information for our listeners. Your age, where you're living these days, your family situation, and, what do you do to fill in the hours of every day?
Well, George, I'm now 69 years old. I grew up in Medford, Mass, and was there for about 35 years and relocated to North Andover, Mass, where I currently reside. I have 5 children, Ryan, Max, Luke, Chloe, and Ellie. And as far as what I do to fill in my time, I put on events and I train. And that's pretty much what my life is event management and athleticism.
Dave, we've talked to some really incredibly talented runners and organizers on this podcast. But with all you've done, it's truly hard to know where to begin. Let's try this. You run great distances, and you've helped raise a lot of money. What's been the hardest physical thing you've ever done, and what was the most meaningful?
Well, I've challenged myself a lot over the years, running across the country and doing World Marathon Challenge and running up the East Coast of America with Bob Hall. But as I look back in any particular situation, what was the toughest maybe on that particular day? One was definitely running across Lake Pontchartrain in New Orleans, which was the New Orleans Marathon. And it's like 23 miles on the bridge. and it was a headwind the whole way. And we ran as a pack and kept switching around, and it was survival of the fittest. So that was probably one marathon that was probably the toughest for me. And then on a swim, I swam from Martha's Vineyard to Falmouth Heights the day before the Falmouth Road Race. And that's one of the roughest channels in the world to try to swim. Only maybe a handful of people have done it, and I survived that one. So, and then the last one, Amby, is the Empire State Building run-up that I did with you back in the early 80s. And you beat me, you son of a gun. You passed me in the stairwell because your reach is so great, you could grab onto the railings and pull yourself up, and there goes Amby blowing right past me. So, but that was a tough one. Oxygen debt, big time.
Amby, I never knew you ran the Empire State run-up. Good for you. So, Dave, let's get back to Boston, your personal bests and worsts in Boston. What's your fastest Boston, your slowest, and the latest finish at night?
Well, my fastest was the year after I ran across the country. Obviously, I became pretty fit, running 45, 50 miles every single day for 3 months. So I ran 2 hours, nice. 29, 58 that year. And I just couldn't get out of that rut of 2:30. I was hoping someday to qualify for the trials, but it just wasn't meant to be. I guess I'm a long distance runner, not just a long distance runner. My slowest was 6 months after I had open heart surgery back in 2019, which was 5 hours, 40 minutes. And what's intriguing about all of that is, and it's the same with you, Amby, because I know about you in terms of what you've run for a best and what you've run recently. And it's pretty amazing to realize that now as we're running through Wellesley halfway, years ago, we would have been crossing the finish line. And emotionally and mentally, how you come to accept that is probably the most challenging part of what we do now.
I think we get pretty good after a while, Dave. It's tough slowing down at first, but I tell people I've had lots of practice at getting slower. I've been getting slower for 50 plus years. So someday I hope to actually be accomplished at it. You know, something that's interesting about your relationship with the Boston Marathon is that probably 98% of the runners out there think that you're actually the president or CEO of the Boston Marathon, or at least an executive. And the truth is you're not, and you never have been. So why don't you set straight the actual relationship of your working with the marathon?
Well, back in 87, there was that infamous wheelchair accident at the start and the rope tripping incident where Rob DiCostello went down, the defending champ. And the BAA at that time said that they needed to maybe hire somebody to take a closer look and take care of that going forward. So they hired me in 88 as the technical coordinator. I was a contractor. I was a consultant. I was an independent contractor. I never was a staff person or employee of the BAA, still not, never was. So even so, I'm treated just like staff. And then in 2001, my title was changed to race director. And then recently, to fit the role, it was changed to race course director. So that's what I'm serving as right now.
So, Dave, 51 straight finishes at Boston, but I don't think it started out all that great. So tell us about your first two Bostons and how they seem to have changed your life.
Sure. So I was a senior at Medford High School, and I just woke up the morning of Patriots Day having this epiphany that I wanted to run the marathon somehow, some way. So I just called my grandfather, who was a supporter of my athleticism when he lived right near Coolidge Corner, which is right around 24 miles. And I said, Grandpa, I'm going to go run that race. So he said, I'll meet you at Coolidge Corner. I said, okay, fine. I was 17. I hadn't registered. I admit, I guess you could call me one of those infamous bandits. Don't tell the race director that. And my Brother drove me to the start. I took off. Long story short, I hit the hills in Newton. Down I went, flat out in the hills, got taken to the Newton Wellesley Hospital in an ambulance. My parents came, picked me up. I got home. I called my grandfather. No answer. Called him again. 9 o'clock at night, he answers the phone. I said, Grandpa, where have you been? He goes, Dave, where have you been? I've been waiting for you all night. Oh, man, Kelly goes by. Street sweepers go by. No Dave. And I said, yeah, I know. I failed. He said, you what? I said, I failed. He said, no, you didn't. I said, I didn't. What'd I do? He said, you learned. I said, oh, great. What'd I learn? He said, you cannot go along in life and set reckless goals. You had no business being in that race. He said, I'll cut another deal with you. What? He said, you train for it next year, and I'll be here waiting for you. I said, deal. 2 months later, he died. And I turned 18, officially registered, train. I was running 120, 130 miles a week. I was fit, ready to go the day before I got sick. My parents said, you can't run. I said, I have to run. The newspapers are saying, Dave running in memory of grandfather. So they said, okay. They drove me to the start. We took off from Hayden Row, Amby, and off we went. And I was so sick, and I said, my parents are right. I shouldn't be doing this. I kept on going. I got to the hills in Newton. I'm doing the survivor shuffle over the hills. Finally get a 21.5. Bam, down I go again. 2 years in a row, I drop out of the Boston Marathon. And all of a sudden, a defining moment happened in my life. And I turned around, and where I was sitting was right in front of the Evergreen Cemetery. And that's where they buried my grandfather. And I never realized that. And the Evergreen Cemetery is right on the Boston Marathon course. And I looked, and there was his tombstone. And I realized, that son of a gun, he said he'd be here waiting for me. I picked myself up, and I finished in 4.5 hours. And on that day, in 1973, April, I said to myself, I'm going to run this race every year for the rest of my life and honor a tribute of the lesson my grandfather taught me about earning the right to do this. And that's why I've run it the last 51 years in a row.
What a story. Wow.
Okay, Dave. Yes, we have to catch our breath after that. That's a tale that can't be beat. So you learned a lot from your grandfather, and very shortly thereafter that, you were running with a few guys at the Greater Boston Track Club. Coach Billy Squires was around, and your teammates had names like Bill Rogers, Greg Meyer, Randy Thomas, Bob Hodge, and that's only a few of them. But they were tough and they were fast. And so what was it like to be part of that group? And what do you learn from running with guys who are in the 2:10 range?
Well, the first thing you learn is how slow you are in comparison. I would put myself what I call, there are tiers, right? You got the top tier, the next tier, and the third tier. I was like the third tier. You got the Billies and the Randys and the Hodges, and then you got a second tier of guys who are in the 220s, and then you got the 230 guys, and that's where I kind of sat. And we would train with the people of equal ability level. I mean, it was amazing watching the other guys go around, but you knew where you fit. So I said to Coach Squires, the guy was brilliant, because I said to him, I want to qualify for the trials, so I have to run a certain time. I said, what do you think I can do? He said, what you can do is whatever you can do 8 repeat miles on the track at pace per mile, then add 30 seconds to that per mile. That's what you can run a marathon in. I said, okay. So I was running 5:05s, 5:08 repeats. So I figured I could run a 5:38, so 5:40 pace in a marathon. The next year, that's exactly what I did. I didn't qualify for the trials, but I did exactly what the coach knew I could do based on my training. He was brilliant.
Some of those old systems, like the Yasso 800s, they still work, don't they? They can really guide your training.
They work.
You mentioned Johnny Kelly, the elder, a few minutes ago, Dave, and I know you got to know him well. And tell us a little bit about him and your particular relationship with him. I mean, he's a running icon.
Yeah, I met him at a road race in Chatham, Mass. Once after I had run across the country. I actually ran that race and I won it. But the interesting thing is I crossed the finish line in second place, but the guy in first place didn't have a bib number. So I ended up winning the race by default. And Johnny Kelly come up to me and introduced himself. He didn't have to. He knew who he was. And he said, listen, sonny boy, he says, I heard about your run across the country, and when you were in the desert, your knee was really hurting you. He said, I prayed for you every day along the way. And I just I almost lost it. I said, here's the most iconic marathoner in the world. Never even met him. And he's praying for me as I'm running across America. So it was just an unbelievable relationship from that point forward. He would invite me to his house. I go down in his basement, see his paintings, all of that. It was, and then I was a pallbearer at his funeral. He's the one. If there was somebody I looked up to in life, it was Johnny Kelly.
And of course, I'm not sure if we said that he had 58 Boston Marathon finishes. Is that the right number?
Yeah, and when I crossed the finish line one year at night, I went into the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel, and there he was in the lobby. He goes, hey, did you finish? I said, yeah. He says, how many is that? And I was like, 45. He goes, 45. He says, hey, you're going to beat my record, and I'm not going to be alive to see it. Well, I'm not going after his record. It's just I wouldn't be so disrespectful because it's like one of the greatest records of all times, finishing 58 Boston Marathons. But I take 1 year at a time and see where it goes.
Well, of course, when he was doing it, he was one of just a handful of runners out there. He didn't have kind of all of the superstructure built around the sport that we have now. So your 51 Bostons, there must be an incredible number of memories attached to all of those. You've told us about the first two. I'm wondering if there's any other that really stands out for you.
Well, certainly, the one right after my heart surgery, I had said to my heart surgeon, it was 6 months before the marathon, I said, hey, before we do anything here, there's this race in Boston in April that I've shuffled through a few times. At the time, it was 47 times. I said, what do you think? And he gave me the best possible answer. He didn't say, no, I don't think you can do it, or yes, I think you can. He said, I'd be extremely disappointed if you couldn't do it. Well, that gave me that 4-letter word, hope. And I said, okay, let's have the surgery and see where it goes. So I had the triple bypass surgery, and I was trying to recover and trying to train and trying to recover. And it's a delicate balance. And Boston's important, but it's not more important than my life and my family. And so it was a tough balance. But I was able to get out there and run my 47th Boston Marathon 6 months after open heart surgery. So that has to be the one that means the most. And of course, I just did my 50th 2 years ago. So that was extremely important to me too.
Dave, after you're 51, after you're 51, you say you're going to take it year by year. How long do you think you can keep this up, and what's your motivation?
Well, I guess the way I look at it is as long as I can get out of bed, all of us have one thing in common. We woke up this morning, and not everyone else did. And maybe you didn't have a lot to do with that, but what happens for the rest of the day is like in your hands. So I think the rest of the day is easy in that sense. So, and I don't know. I know some people say, well, what's the point? And why does there have to be a point? It's just what I do. When the pandemic came and we had to cancel the Boston Marathon in 2020, when Patriots Day came, what did I do? I ran a marathon around my neighborhood. And then when the virtual came to make it an official Boston Marathon, I ran the virtual around my neighborhood. But then a week later, I woke up and I said, you know something? I haven't run the Boston Marathon course yet this year, like I always do. So I went out, drove to Hopkinton, ran the Boston Marathon course, ran 3 Boston Marathons that year in 2020. Why? I don't know. It's what I do.
And you do, and you do, and you do. Dave, I want to reflect back briefly on the heart surgery. A lot of people would have been very quiet and almost embarrassed about the fact that they were running all these Boston Marathons and they still needed to have a heart surgery. You took the opposite approach. You told everybody what was going on in your life. You must not have signed the HIPAA forms or whatever about privacy. Why was it important to talk about it?
So this is what actually happened. So when I went and got diagnosed, the doctor came in and said, he looked at the monitors, there. And I said, there what? He says, there you have severe coronary artery disease. My heart was fine. It was the arteries. And, I said, you must be looking at the wrong film strips. He goes, no, that's you. And I said, how do you think this happened? Genetics, self-inflicted, combination of both. And I turned to the doctor and I said, zip it up. He said, what? I said, don't tell anyone. He said, why? I said, because it's a ding in my armor. I said, this is embarrassing. People are going to think that because I run so much, I caused this. And that's not the case, but that's what they're going to think. So don't tell anyone. Well, then about a month or two later, it leaks out. People hear about it. And then I'm getting emails from runners all over the country saying to me, hey, I heard about you. And I have the same symptoms. And I went in and I got diagnosed and I came out with 3 stents and you saved my life. I went, huh? I saved your life? I didn't save your life. You saved your own life. However, all of a sudden, a light went off in my head and said, you selfish little son of a gun. You don't want to tell anyone because you think you're embarrassed and you think it's a ding in your armor. But if you do, you're creating an awareness. And the awareness is just because you're fit doesn't mean you're healthy. I always thought it did. And so do most of us runners. And many of our runners are the most vulnerable out there because we think we're invincible. So I said, I need to create an awareness. You guys know the same people I know who went out for a run one day and never come home. I can name them off. There's like 7 of them who are dear friends of mine. Why? I don't know. Did they not know? Did they know, but they were going to fight in it anyways? I don't know. So I just felt an obligation and responsibility to create an awareness that just because you're fit doesn't mean you're healthy. And if you feel something, say something, do something about it. Save your own life.
So Dave, you're going to have that. Thank you for that story. I think it's been one of your most important contributions to the sport. You're going to have a different Boston Marathon this year. You're going to get to start the race and get a few waves going, but then you're going to jump into the pack and run with everybody else. And you haven't done that in more than 30 years. What is that going to be like, and who's going to run with you?
Well, so for the last 36 years, I've been riding on a scooter in the front of the race, just making sure that the course is set up right, observing everything, helping with the lead, pro men package, lead, all of that. And then this year, I just asked the BAA, I said, what I don't know is that's going on is what's happening in the middle of the pack. The way I look at it as a race director, there's 3 races going on. There's the front end, there's the back end, and there's the middle. Front end are the pros and the elites. The middle is the age groupers and so forth. And the back of the pack is the back of the pack. And they're all experiencing something different. I want to experience what the middle of the pack is experiencing. So we agreed that I would send everyone off, all the different divisions, wave 1, wave 2, and then jump in the back of wave 2. So the last time I ran in 1987, there were 6,000 runners. Now there's 30,000 runners. This is going to be a totally different experience than I'm used to. And what I'm so enthusiastic about and thrilled about is that I'm going to be running with 2 of my children. Ellie, who's 19, who is running her first Boston Marathon, and Max, who's 30 years old. He'll be running his second Boston Marathon. So to run with your children when they weren't even born when I started doing this is going to be a thrill of a lifetime.
Dave, I can give you some advice as a dad. You're supposed to let them beat you.
I won't have to supposed to. They'll do it on their own. I'm almost 70. It's not going to be hard to let them beat me.
Dave, since 1988, since you've been the race organizer, what did you learn that was crucial to the task that you hadn't imagined beforehand? And as part of that, also tell us what organizing detail or details go on behind the scenes that most of those 30,000 runners have no idea is taking place.
Well, there is a handful of us who, are out there and are seen, and, arguably we get the credit all the time, but there's such an army of people involved in this event in particular. I mean, thousands and thousands of people. You got 10,000 volunteers. You have an organizing committee of 110 people. You have a staff of like 50 people. You have public safety agencies, law enforcement. I mean, there's over 7,000 law enforcement officials out there planning this thing day in and day out. So that's the one thing that really struck me when I got involved, behind the curtain and recognized and realized how many people are involved in making this event happen that no one ever realizes and has an appreciation for. The way I look at my job over the years was not as a race director. I look at it as more as a conductor. Like an Arthur Fiedler. The goal is to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. The goal is to surround yourself with more experienced people. They're the ones who make it happen. I'm just there to make sure that it all comes out in a harmonious manner type of a thing. And in terms of what runners don't understand is just all the planning in the sense of, for example, hypothetical tabletop exercises. We throw out everything on the table. What ifs? What if the buses get caught in a traffic jam on the Mass Pike? Do you still stop the race? Do you not? What if there's a house fire in Ashland and it blocks the road? Are there bypass routes that are in place? What if? And what if? We spend as much, if not more time on the what ifs and plan B, C, and D than sometimes on A, because A is just everything going great and no issues. And it just gunfires, down the road they go, cross the finish line, pick up the banana peels and go home. But it doesn't usually turn out quite that way. So there's a lot of planning that goes on behind the scenes that people would never be aware of.
Dave, the planning that you and your team does is unbelievable. Of course, there are always some things that end up being beyond your control, no matter what the planning. 2013 was one of those years with the bombs at the finish line. Tell us what your experience was with the bombs. Where were you? And when did you realize this was no longer your race, that there was other folks in charge?
Well, it was a tough experience for me only in that I wasn't even there. Even though I was the race director, what happened was the year before was the hot year, 2012, 89 degrees. And so there was a lot of carnage. And so I woke up the morning at 2:13 and I said, we got to have a good day. We can't have another day like last year. And it was perfect. Great weather day. Everything was going to go great. We get to the start. I'm standing there. I asked for a 26-second moment of silence for the 26 victims of the Sandy Hook massacre. So imagine in Hopkinton, you could hear a pin drop of 26 seconds moment of silence. And little did I know then that 26 miles away from that very spot, we were going to be experiencing our own tragedy. Didn't know that at the time. Gunfires, down the course I go, everything is great. Cross the finish line, the scooter, go up, hug my family sitting in the bleachers, all good. Waited a couple hours, and then all of a sudden I text the CEO, said, hey, everything's looking good. Okay to go back out to the start now and start my trek. And yep, beat it. Okay, bang. I go to the start. I'm standing there. I'm on the starting line with the state police, and my phone rings, and I'm told what happened at the finish. And never did I believe it was bombs. I thought a generator explosion or something. But then I got really nervous, called my family, no answer, cell service knocked out. State police drove me back to the finish from Hopkinton. 20 minutes it took us. We were going over 100 miles an hour down the Mass Pike, get into the security area. Everything had been evacuated. The first place I went was the medical tent. And I had gone in there before I left to go back out to Hopkinton, and there was hardly any business. When I went back in there the second time, it was jammed, but not with runners, with people who were impacted by the bombing. Then I went to go find my family, and police stopped me, and they said, hey, where you going? I said, I'm going up to the finish line to see my family, find my family. And they said, you can't go up there. I said, well, I'm the race director. Here's my ID. And they said, well, it's not your race anymore. And that's when I realized how critical this thing had been. And so I said, well, the only thing I can do is put my race director hat back on, go back to work. And there were 6,500 runners that got stopped. What are we going to do with them? Where are they going to go? So I helped manage that piece of it out on the road while the medical team was taking care of the victims who were impacted by the bombing.
Listening to the stories about the bombing, Dave, I'm thinking on that terrific documentary that John Dunham made on the Boston Marathon, and you were pretty much the star of that movie, and I see you going to meetings and walking around, not smiling a whole lot in there, and tell us, what impact did that movie have on your life?
George, I don't know if the movie, I lived it. So what happened that day had an impact. The movie it was a movie, right? And so the movie didn't have an impact, but, one thing it did do is, I learned a lot from the movie about the history of the Boston Marathon, because in essence, that's what the movie was supposed to be all about. But, and I know we say I didn't smile that much in the movie, but I did smile a lot during the interviews. That all went on the cutting room floor for some reason, so, but yeah, I mean, I think they did a great job with detailing the history of the Boston Marathon, and it just happened to be right around the time of the bombing, so that was included in it.
Dave, you'll be 70 next August, and that sounds like a time for rest and relaxation, but it's not typically what you do on your or near your birthday. Tell us about your birthday efforts.
Yeah, again, Amby, George, what this is all about for me is it's all personal. I'm a competitor, but I'm more of a competitor with myself, not the rest of the world. I'm not trying to prove anyone wrong that they didn't pick me or I got cut. That's not what this is about. This is challenging myself, whether it be mentally, physically, emotionally. I enjoy doing that, right? But I'm reasonable about my expectations. When I turned 12, I just went out for a run that day, and I ran 6 miles around this pond near my house. And then had cake and ice cream, and I thought, well, I better go burn this off. So I did it again. And coincidentally, I ran 12 miles on my 12th birthday. And when I turned 13, I said, what I do when I turn 12, I ran. So I did 13 and 14, 14 and 15, 15. And I started this quote unquote streak, which, I'm a streak freak, I guess you could say. But, when I start these things, it's really hard to stop them once you get going. I turned 50, I ran 50. I turned 60, I ran 60. So that's what I've been doing pretty much on my birthday or in and around my birthday. And again, it's just all a very personal thing that I like to challenge myself. Why? It just makes it's a connection with the past. And, people say to me all the time, what are you going to do when you turn 90? And I always say, well, it's my game, so it's my rules. I can change the rules. And I'll most likely change the rules, but I'll do something. I'll be moving, whether it's all on foot or foot and bike or whatever it might be. I'm going to do what I can do based on the circumstances at the time. And that I'm hoping to run 70 miles on my 70th birthday in August.
Dave, you mentioned turning 90. And we're reading a lot about aging these days. And one of the big things that, everyone's talking about is getting sleep. You need your 8 hours and all of that. And you've always said that sleep's overrated. So how much sleep do you actually get? And tell us your take on that.
So, George, I never try to give people what I would call advice. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not an expert at all these different disciplines. I just do what I do and what works for me. So all I do in life is share experiences, right? This is what I do, and this is why I do it. And it's up to you. If there's some nuggets of wisdom in there that you can extract and you can take for yourself that works for you, go for it. And with sleep, the way I look at it is just do the math. If you live till you're 90, and you sleep 8 hours a day, you just slept 30 full years, prone on a bed, accomplishing nothing. Now, I understand that the health requirements, and I get all of that. I truly believe that the body has more powers of adaptability and endurance than most people give it credit for. And I know there's a lot of wisdom out there and medical research that says you got to get your sleep. I get it. Well, maybe everyone else does, but I feel like people say to me all the time, why don't you get a book, get a lounge chair, go to the beach and rest? I said, because that's not rest for me. I am resting when I am accomplishing, when I am moving. That's what I'm resting. If I sit on the beach with a book, I'm antsy. I'll burn more energy than if I was running 10 miles, right? So everyone's different, and I'm different with regard to the sleep situation. I wish we were born where we could just take a pill and just have just be able to get the rest by taking the pill and still be able to continue getting things done. But I know that's not the case.
Dave, I'm still waiting for a number.
Whoa.
How many hours?
5 to 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
On a good day.
I'm going to contradict you on one thing. You said you're not an expert. I would say you're an expert on the Boston Marathon course and maybe even on how to run it well. What's the most important piece of advice you have for people who run Bostons and found it pretty darn tough?
I think the best thing you can do for yourself, especially if you live around here, is to know the course. You got to know the course. You got to eliminate the element of surprise. It's not just flat and fast, and it's undulating. Downhill for the first 5, a little bit flatter for the next 10, and then uphill for the next whatever, and then flat again. And you have to know how to run that, right? Some of the greatest runners in the world, I remember like Craig Virgin came and ran really well here. I think it was second, but it beat the heck out of him. Right. And he only came back maybe once before again. So it's really a matter of Billy Rogers didn't win it the first year, so to win it and to run it well is to know the course. Secondly, if you're fortunate enough to either train on the course or train on topography similar to the course, I think you're going to do yourself some good. And lastly, it's all about patience, right? So your peak, you're ready to go, you're at a height, the gun fires, you want to just take off, it's streaming downhill for the first half mile. You get sucked into that. You're going to pay for it later on down the road. And so I've always felt my PR is running negative splits, running the second half faster than the first half. Mutai, when he ran 203.09 or something, when he did that, he ran negative splits, right? So that's that's my advice is be patient and know the course and know your ability level before the gunfires. People say, what do you think you're going to run in the marathon? Oh, I have no idea. Well, then you're in a lot of trouble because how do you even know what pace to go out at? So, do the work, earn the right, and you should have a pretty good Boston Marathon. I think it can be a fast race if you run it the right way.
Dave, we know the Boston course isn't accepted for record performances because it's a one-way net downhill course. And yet, how do you compare it against what we think of as some pretty quick courses like London, Chicago, and Berlin, where most of these records have been set in recent years?
Well, I respect and appreciate rules and policies that are set. I get it. You have to have those. But every now and then, I think there are exceptions to the rule. And I think Boston's one of them. I mean, how many world records have been set on the Boston Marathon course in the last 50 years? Maybe 1 or 2, right? So it's not what one would consider an easy course. So if it's not easy, why can't it be record eligible? All right, point to point. I get it, could be wind aided. But we put wind velocity anemometers out there. And maybe just like in a track meet for a 100-yard dash, if the wind's at the back too much, then that performance is not eligible for a record. And same thing could be with the Boston Marathon. We could put anemometers out there, and if it's determined that it was a wind-aided day, then maybe if someone ran a record time, it wouldn't be accepted. Similarly, I would love, and we started this, Dr. Aaron Bagish at Mass General Hospital when he was there, and I started talking about doing studies on the treadmill about what it's like to run downhill, a downhill course versus a flat or an uphill. And could we prove that the body takes more of a beating running more downhill than uphill, and as a result, you can't say that the Boston Marathon, because of its significant downhill, is an easier race to run than, say, a Chicago. So I've always felt that Boston should be record eligible.
Dave, you don't have to do that experiment with Aaron. Every runner who runs Boston knows it beats you up more than any other race. So we're getting near the end here. Our podcast, of course, is called Running the State of the Sport. So we want to ask you, what do you think is the state of the sport? What's really good? What's okay? What could use fixing up a little?
Well, it's very different now because we just come out of a pandemic. And prior to it, I mean, races were selling out at record pace. And this is the world I live in, not the upfront competitive professional world, but the world I live in. And all my races were like, it was off the charts. And then in 2020, everyone went over the cliff. And then I thought I lost the business. I thought, did the sport go away? And gradually, obviously, it's coming back. But what's so different about it now is this concept of people are hesitant. People are waiting. They're not registering for races right away. It's more back end than it is front end. So for those of us managing these events, it's really hard and challenging to plan because we don't know whether we're going to have 1,000 people, 2,000 people, is it going to sell out? Is it not? So how many medals you order, T-shirts you order, porta-johns, it's hard. It's really hard to plan. And that's the state of the sport right now in terms of event directors is the challenge of knowing what to plan for. Certainly on the front end, the competitive side of things, like I said, philanthropy has entered the space. And when it did, the walls of intimidation crumbled. People started believing in themselves. So there's so many people participating in races. So we have to take care of everyone. We have to take care of the pros. We have to take care of the age groupers, and we have to take care of the more charity type runners. So that's changed a lot over the years, and race directors and whatnot have to be sensitive to all three groups in order for their event to be successful.
So Dave, we do this with all of our guests. We give you 3 fairy godmother wishes, and only 3. And you can wish for really anything you want, yourself, for others, your family, for this year's Boston Marathon, for the rest of your life, for the 52nd Boston that you're going to run, just whatever. Tell us 3 good wishes.
Well, not necessarily in this order, but one is, it's not only a wish, it's a prayer for me that I don't mind getting older. I just pray not to get old. I'll get older. I don't want to get old. I want to push that threshold out so far. I just want to be moving. I want to be running. I just want to be healthy. I want to be able to lift my grandchildren and run with them. And I don't want to get old. So, it's funny, really quick. If I was the divine person who created all this, what I would have done is, instead of you go from 1 to 25 years old to 50 to 75 to 90 or whatever, I would have gone from 1 to 25 to 50. And then I would have had all of us bang a Yui and go back down, go from 50 back to 49 to 48, and go back to where you began. And 2 things happen. You don't kind of just disintegrate. Like, that's cruel. I don't want that to happen, right? I want to get stronger the older I get. And you get a second shot at each age. But so if I had a wish, that's what I would do, is I'd have everyone just go to 50 and head back south, and we all get 100 years. Okay, good. Secondly, certainly it's all about, our children, at least for me. And I just want them to be happy and be at peace. That's what I want from my kids. Whatever it is, I don't push them in any direction whatsoever. That's all I want. And then lastly, I so enjoy, and this is what I want my legacy to be, not running marathons, running Boston, directing Boston. All that's good stuff. But I want my legacy to be about giving back, about, because when you give, you receive even more in return. And I feel like I've been, to coin a phrase, blessed in my life. Even though I had open heart surgery, I still have my health. I'm good, right? I mean, they fixed me, so I'm good, And so I just want to continually do what I can do to give back, especially kids. I want to give them a chance in life. That's what my foundation is all about. I want to help anyone and everyone that I can have an impact on. And that's why I do these motivational speaking appearances and things like that. That's what gets me up every morning, is knowing that I can have an impact, a positive impact on someone's life. The last one is I gave a talk one day, maybe a couple of months ago. And after it was over, a gentleman comes up to me and he shook my hand. And he goes, "I just want you to know something." I said, "What?" He says, "When I come in here, I wasn't feeling good." I said, "Oh." He said, "No, I wasn't feeling good." And about myself, anything. And, I had visions of like hurting myself. I said, "Oh." He said, "But after listening to you and hearing what you had to say," he says, "I'm going to make a run of it. I feel better now." And he said, and he started walking away and he said, "You know something? What? You saved my life." And he walked away. That's what I want to do.
Dave, we know that you and your children and many others, I'm sure, are running for your foundation at Boston this year. And we'll put a link in the show notes that lets people know where they can make a contribution to the foundation and your running efforts this year. We want to thank you so much for the time you gave us today. It's always inspirational to hear your stories and everything you're doing. And we want you to know that all of us out here really appreciate what you do for the sport, not just on Boston Marathon Day, but on every day.
Thank you, Amby. Thank you, George. We're all in this thing together. Thank you for having me.
Amby, Dave's done and continues to do so much that it's hard to pick out what's really the most impressive. What do you think?
I like the fact that we finally pinned him down after a little bit of trouble on his sleeping habits, and he admitted that he only gets about 5 hours a night. That wasn't surprising to us because we occasionally get emails from him at 3:30 in the morning. I also really appreciated the way he shared his heart health story with the world. He had hesitations at first, but then when he saw the light and realized that he could send an important message to all marathoners, that none of us are immune and that we all have to be attuned to signals from our bodies, he switched quickly and really told everything about his own experience. And this year, I'm just excited that he's going to get to run in the pack rather than riding a motorcycle half the day. He'll have a son and a daughter back there to run with him. He says they're way quicker than he is and will take off into the distance. I kind of suspect that son and daughter are going to have a really good time running at their father's side for probably every step of that 26.2 miles. George, what did you find most striking about Dave's comments?
Amby, it was tough to beat his Boston Marathon origin story, how he turned failure into lifetime success. He dropped out of his first Boston and very nearly dropped out of the second, but then got inspired by memories of his grandfather. So he picked himself off the sidewalk and hobbled to the finish. That was in 1973, and he's finished every one since then. By the way, Dave's no Bill Rogers or Greg Meyer, but he does have a Boston best of 2:29, which in my book is not bad at all.
That's not bad in any of our books. And that's it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed joining us as much as we enjoyed sharing the time with you. We'll be back again soon with another episode. Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. And in signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving, onward.